Alright, talking about figure drawing today. So, as per usual, I'm just going to show you guys on Photoshop. You follow along on your pages as best you can. You'll use reference later. It'll be great. So, there's a couple things to consider when drawing the human figure, okay? There is, well, firstly, the most important thing is figuring out which biological sex it's going to be. Is it going to be male or is it going to be female? There's different considerations for both that we have to consider, okay? The biggest thing between the male and female figure is, if you look at the size of this rib cage and then hips versus the size of this rib cage and then the size of these hips, you can tell a huge difference between the two, right? Like, I could hide that, and for the most part, you can kind of see which one is male and which one's female. Masculine or feminine, rather. Okay? This is a nature thing, this is a biological thing, and this is something that you have to apply in your figure drawing in order to get accurate figures. Okay? We'll turn that back on. That's the biggest thing between male and female. That's it. Okay? You can have really like yoked, muscular females, like Amazonian, Wonder Woman type deal. You just have to make sure that the hips are at least the same size or bigger than the rib cage and shoulders. Okay, that's something you gotta look out for. If you draw a very like heroic figure and the shoulders are all the way out and it makes this kind of like V taper, all right, we call that the Dorito. You want to make sure that the hips are kind of in line with that Dorito as much as you can. Okay, that's kind of the big, huge difference. All right, so just keep that in mind moving forward, and you'll be fine. Okay, and down here, we kind of have like a difference between the actual shape language. So, heroic male figures, they're always a little bit more boxy, a little bit more angular. Heroic female figures, they're always just a little bit softer. Okay, you can have your details be boxy and jagged and all that stuff and have really good musculature, but for the most part you want to go for a little bit softer. Alright, now the reason why I showed you guys how to do the Loomis head first is because if you draw the head of your character, or at least the base of it, you're able to figure out the rest of the character size using that head as reference. Okay, so if I were to draw, let's do a new layer. If I were to draw one of these, I'm going to use this as scale reference, okay? And then if I put 1, 2, 3, sorry, this is taking forever, 4, 5, 6, 7. So about 7 heads. So whenever we're talking about proportion on different types of figures, ideal human proportion is 7 heads tall. All right, if you get to 8 and 9, we consider that heroic scale. All right, so think about like Superman, Batman, all those guys. That's drawn in heroic scale. They've got big musculatures, they've got big anatomy. It looks great. What's up, Derek?
What about if it's less than
You'll have to use like real life reference for that, because that's not like a standard thing. Like I think it goes Normal human scale, like the average guy, not, anything crazy, doesn't belong in a comic book, I think is 6 heads tall. Ideal is 7 heads. 8 and 9 is heroic. So it's kind of a scale. So I think that it depends on what type of condition the person has. So, like, I know that certain types of dwarfism, it's like people's heads are a little bit different. So, like, you've got some people with dwarfism that their heads are like a normal scaled person's head, and it's just their body that's little. But then you've got some people with dwarfism, like Vern Troyer, where his head was kind of small and more in proportion with the rest of his body. So it just depends on what kind, right? What the character needs, and like what real life reference you could use for that. Because there's no reason why you can't use real life reference for that. Especially for something that's so, like, I'm not gonna say rare, but like anytime a person with those proportions is drawn for like a comic or a graphic novel or something like that, it's not a human person, it's like a dwarf or a gnome or something fantastical, which is kind of messed up if you think about it. Because, like, a little person doesn't just have to be a fantastical creature, it could just be a little person, but it's also human. I don't know. You might need to corner the market on that. That might be a great idea for you. Okay.
I might need that.
That's a good question though. It's a good question. All right. So just to recap, whenever you make your heads, that's gonna be what you use to make your scale. All right, and it doesn't need to be exact. You don't need to go in and measure the head and then use that exact measurement and measure it out. You can eyeball it and it's going to be pretty close. That's fine. All right. The reason why we want to do that is because if you have everything be exacting all the time, when you have to draw it in perspective, you're not going to be able to do that. So you're going to have to eyeball it. So if you've not had practice eyeballing things, then it's going to be infinitely harder to do that. The other thing is that everybody is not the exact same proportion and scale every time. Alright? Not everybody that's as tall as Superman is as wide as Superman. And not everybody that's as wide as Superman is not as tall as Superman. You have to have some kind of variation in your figures. Okay? And I'm pretty sure, like, just reviewing the reference boards for a lot of you, you don't have heroic scale characters. You've got like pretty normal characters, and they've just got like cool accessories and cool outfits and stuff like that. So, ideal is probably where you want to go. If you are doing heroic scale, awesome. That's the easiest one to do. Right? Reason why is because when you've got all the muscles and they're all defined, you can draw all that and have a bunch of reference for it, and it's going to look good. It's kind of harder to have a figure that's a little bit more subdued. You have to know how to be subtle, okay? Like, if I had to draw a skinny guy, I would have so many problems with that versus if I had to draw, like, a big, yoked-up superhero guy. It's just how musculature works. It's easier to draw all of it because it's picked out and it's defined already, right? We've got that. Okay. So I'll show you guys the basics of drawing the whatchamacallit, like the actual baseline shapes for the actual figure itself, okay? Or what I like to do instead of a stick figure, because, like, drawing a stick figure is just going to reinforce bad habits, and it's not going to lay things out in a way that makes sense, and it's not going to work in your favor. So it's best to break this down into primitive shapes as much as possible. So, like, if we look at the arm, what primitive would I call that? Is it a cylinder, a box, or a sphere? Cylinder. It's a cylinder, right? Because it's long, and it kind of has to go a little bit rounded like that. All right. Once you understand the form of a cylinder, you now understand how to shade it. Okay? Same thing with the forearm. At the end of the day, it's just a cylinder. Does it have nuance and all kinds of other stuff going on? Sure it does. The forearm is the most complicated muscle group that you can draw, except for the back. But, you know, there's a reason why you don't see a lot of backs on superhero comics. It's all selective, right? And for the joints, you can always just put a sphere, right? Because for the most part, human joints, especially on the parts that bend inward, like the back of the knee, or the, like, right below the bicep, that's soft and squishy, because it's gonna squish when you bend it at the joint. Okay, a good rule of thumb is that if something is soft and squishy, the other side of it needs to be rigid, because that's the hinge, right? That's the bone that lets you bend it. If you tried to bend it the other way, what's gonna happen? Your arm's gonna snap, because it's not how a hinge works. It doesn't go all that way. Right? So cylinders, and then for the deltoid, always a sphere. And then for the hand, you can do one of two ways, all right? Most of the time, I just try to draw fists. I don't try to pose my hands with fingers. When I do, it usually takes me a really long time because I've got reference open and I'm trying to get it just right. Because if there's anything that drives me crazy, it's incorrect hand drawings, especially if I do it. So I try to just avoid it. So most of the time, you can just draw a boxy shape, and then be like, "Oh yeah, no, I'm gonna get back to that. Don't worry, work in progress." And then it's okay that it's not finished. Okay. Now for the torso. Whenever we draw the torso, alright, usually the way that I like to work is like I like to draw my Loomis head, try to get that as much as possible. Alright. Then I like to get my neckline figured out. And then from my neckline, I can figure out what my trapezius muscles are doing, okay? The trapezius muscles are commonly referred to as traps. That's kind of this part of your shoulder, okay? That's like where your neck has to blend in to your torso area. For a lot of people, it's kind of a hard thing to draw because you don't know what to put on it. Like, you don't know how much to put on it. If you want to make a really heroic looking character, you can just have a very gradual looking slope or kind of bump it up a little bit. Because this is an independent muscle group that you can work on and make it really big, okay? If you look at, like, the Hulk, his trapezius muscles is like that. Like, he doesn't really have much of a neck. Like, he's like crazy. And then his deltoid does like one of these. Okay? But for this guy, just to follow the reference, just have it slope down from the shoulder. Or, not the shoulder, the neck. And then once I have that, I can kind of figure out where the bottom of my rib cage is going to go. Okay? Now, when you draw the rib cage, you want to think about the skeleton, right? Like the actual, like, human skeleton rib cage, because that's the overall anatomy that you're shooting for, like the bony landmark, okay? Let's get this picture. Bada bing. Watch it not work. So if we look at the shape of the rib cage versus the shape of like this muscle, right? If you think about the functions of a muscle in the human body, all right? A lot of it has to sit on top of what? Say it louder. What do muscles sit on top of? Bones, right? So that those muscles that sit on top of bones, they have to kind of follow the shape of the bone that they're sitting on, right? Like your muscle is not rigid enough that it could just start making up shapes out of nowhere. Okay? So when we're thinking about the rib cage, which is half of the human torso, we want to kind of copy that as much as possible. This gives us dynamics. This gives us a little bit more oomph when we're talking about making our figures, right? And just a word about the rib cage. The pectoral muscles, or the chest muscles. Oh. Where's my thing? They shouldn't, most of the time, they should not sit below where the rib cage is. Okay, the reason why we don't want that is because in human anatomy they don't do that, especially with a muscular figure, because that means it's flabbing over the rib cage. You want to keep it higher and have it overlap the arm quite a bit. You can kind of see, especially on the reference, that the pectoral and the deltoid, they kind of flow into each other. All right, they're not the same muscle group, but they're similar enough that when you're just drawing your basic construction shapes, they can just flow into each other. And it'll look correct because that's more or less how ours work. Like how our muscles work. If you want to add a little division, you can right there. But that's just me. Alright. And again, don't get too caught up detailing just your construction shapes on your figure drawing. You want to make sure that the landmarks are there. Like, I want a clear definition of, like, my rib cage compared to, like, my abdomen, and stuff like that. But you don't want to have it be like every muscle is there and it's defined. Don't do that. Don't get caught up on that, okay? Because it's going to waste a lot of time for you. All right? And just to continue down from the rib cage, we've got the abdomen or the tummy area, okay? So if you look at the proportions here, if you look at the top of the deltoid to the bottom of the underwear line to about the middle of where, like, the rib cage is, you'll notice that these are pretty evenly spaced out, okay? So you want to kind of think about that rhythm. So however big your rib cage is, that's pretty much going to be how big your abdomen is. Like, tall-wise, not width-wise. So you kind of just bring it down, straight line. And then for me, I like to bring it into a V shape on both sides. The reason why I do that specifically is because I want to have a clear area of separation for my legs, okay? A lot of people, they kind of do legs really incorrectly. And I don't like it when people do legs incorrectly. They do, like, sticks, and then they draw, like, muscles on top of sticks. And I don't think that's really how, like, the rhythm and flow of the muscle and bone of human bodies work. So what I like to do is I draw a V taper down to the bottom of the crotch area, which is about right here. So, like, think about if your figure was wearing underwear, where would the bottom of that underwear cut off, right? Like, where would the absolute bottom of it be? So about right there. So if we turn off our reference, we can kind of see that we've got an upper body that's laid out well enough that I know what I'm looking at. Like, everybody knows this is a torso, this is an arm, this is a shoulder, and this is a forearm, okay? That's the big thing about construction shapes, is that keep it simple, and you can do whatever you want with them, all right? A lot of videos on YouTube, a lot of people, they try to teach, like, oh, dynamic posing, like it's this big, hard thing. But as long as you understand how these foundational shapes work in 3D space, you'll be able to pose them however you want to. And if all the human body is made up as foundational shapes, then Bob's your uncle, you're able to do whatever pose you want, and it's going to look great. So it's all about practice, practice, practice with this. All right?
Mr. Cox, this is Nurse Bennett. Do you have a copy?
Let me turn that off. All right? Now, if we refer to our reference, there's a couple things we need to look out for. If you were to draw an arc, like a smiley face almost, between the elbows, what does that line up with on this? On the belly button, right? So that's a really easy way to figure out your arm length, right? I see a lot of people, they have a lot of trouble with that. They either make their arms way too long or way too short, and you don't have to, all right? The elbow or the middle of the arm needs to line up pretty close with the belly button. Always draw like a smiley face. And that lines up pretty spot on every time, okay? So in the inverse of that, if you've got a dude and he's short and stocky, like, I don't know, Wolverine, or you're drawing like a fantasy dwarf character, like they're super wide, but they're not very tall, as long as you get the torso figured out first and you're happy with the proportions of that, you can figure out the arm length then. So if you've got a super long guy, he's got a long torso, you can then use that to make his arms, which are going to be longer. So think about like the Avatar people. What are they called? The Na'vi. All right. Think about the blue cat Avatar people, right? They're super long. If you look at like where their elbow is compared to their belly button, it still lines up, even though they're super long. Right? That's kind of what I'm talking about when we're talking about proportion, and you want to make sure that you like get the very important parts of proportion right. And the first very important part for me at least is going to be lining that elbow up with your belly button closely. It doesn't have to be like super spot on, but it needs to be pretty close that it looks correct, right? All right, so if we look at the very top of the head and the bottom of the crotch area, that length is half of our figure, or it should be about half of our figure. So we can use that as a way to measure where our legs need to be. So I'm going to take that, move it down, and then draw across. And for the most part, that's the ballpark, all right? That's where we want to be with the bottoms of our feet, okay? That'll give us in proportion to the rest of our upper body, okay? And again, just like the arms, the human leg is divided up into 3 sections, okay? We've got the quad area. We've got the calf area. We've got the knee. All right? We've got, if you think about it from the terms of the arm, the quad is the bicep and tricep. The knee is the elbow. The calf is the forearm. And the feet are just weird long hands. Like, if you really think about it, it is. It's kind of funky. Yeah. So that follows the same proportions as the arm, really. It does. So like, let's say we've got the hip area. We'll call that our deltoid. Then it needs to flow into our quad area. And then for the knee, I've seen a lot of people do a lot of different tricks to illustrate the knee. But basically all you want to do is just put a circle there. And we'll know that that's the joint. Okay? A lot of people, and this is popular, and I'm okay with it, if they just draw a straight line, and then another straight line, and it's about the same, and then put a ball at the end of that, and then a ball in the middle, that is good enough to get the point across on where your leg is going to be. Okay? Because the reason why people do that is so that if they need to draw something in pose, they don't have to sit there and do anything crazy. They can just be like, oh, my guy, his leg's going to be out like that, his ball, and then, yeah, it's one of those. You know, like, that'll be that, and then that'll be that. You know, something like that. It'll give you an idea of where things need to be. But if I were you, I would start at least practicing putting some kind of form around this, okay? The quad, you can kind of think of it as almost like a diamond shape. Like a big meat diamond. And then it's got to flow into the knee. And then the calf is pretty much going to be the same, except the diamond isn't going to be the entire length of it. The diamond's only going to take up half of it, and then it turns into a cylinder for the rest of it. So, quad, full diamond, calf, half diamond, cylinder. Right? And then as far as feet go, this is an easy way to do feet. Okay? You don't have to sit there and draw the toes. Unless you're a freak like that. Don't have to. All you got to do is figure out what the base shape is. And for the most part, all it's going to be is think of like a duck bill. Right? Y'all know what a duck bill is, right? It's the mouth of a duck. It goes like this. That is enough to communicate that that is a foot. Okay? If you draw it from the side, it's going to look something like this. That's okay. That is totally fine. It makes sense. I know what I'm looking at. This just looks like two legs right next to each other. And one's pointing this way, the other's pointing that way. Okay? You don't need to reinvent the wheel, especially when you're just doing construction shapes. I feel like I've said that so many times today, but it's so true. Don't get it twisted, and don't psych yourself out. It's easier than it has to be. And always arch it, right? Don't make, unless you want to, but I would suggest not just making it like a straight line across, like where your toes would be. I suggest arching it a little bit, because realistically, your toes kind of arch, just like your fingers on your hands. If you look at, like, if you hold your hand up, your index finger is shorter than your middle finger, but then that's just a little bit shorter than your middle finger, and then your pinky is shorter than everything. So think about that arc as far as toes go, right? Most people, their big toe is the biggest, and then it kind of slopes inward towards the rest of the foot. Or some people, they've got a big toe, and then their second toe is bigger than their big toe, like long-wise. So then it's kind of like a point, almost. So think about what kind of feet your character has. But if you want to make it just normal, just do a duck bill. Right? And that's good enough. Once you've got a basic understanding of how these shapes are laid out, you can then refine it, right? So don't ever start with your what's going to end up being your finished piece. You don't ever want to do that. What you want to do is you want to start off with your construction shapes, and you want to build up, and you want to get your shapes right, and you want to just use this time to figure out your understanding of anatomy. Yeah, that's what I thought. And how these things are supposed to look in the real world. Because the more you do that, the better your work's going to be. I feel a little silly saying that, but you would be surprised at the amount of people that put no effort in, and they're like, hey, why does my stuff look bad all the time? I'm like, well, that's why. You don't put enough effort in. You don't study this stuff constantly. So your stuff's not great. But it doesn't have to be that way. You've got time here and now that you should be using to do all this. All right, does anybody have any questions so far about just basic human figure drawing? No, nothing? Nothing? All right, if you're wondering why I just did the male one and not the female one, it's because everything is the same except for really just the rib cage to hip ratio. Everything else is pretty much the same. Even the head, the neck, all that stuff. Just do more round and less boxy, and then you'll have your female figure. Okay? Just practice that drawing on your schizo pages, and tomorrow I'll give you guys your 11 by 17 sheets so you could start drawing your actual character. Okay?
Where are we going to go and look at everyone's board that we made and
If everybody had it turned in, the problem is that literally over the half class still don't have it done. So, yeah.